welcome in to the Week 2 edition of the Playbook Pundits podcast here on SiouxCityJournal.com. I'm sports editor Zach James, and alongside with me, as always, is assistant sports editor Shane Lantz. As a reminder, you can follow us both on Twitter. I'm at Zachary W. James on Twitter, and Shane is at Shane M. Lantz on Twitter. So pretty easy to remember. We have the same type of Twitter handle.
That's our format, right?
Yes, that is our format, and it just came up serendipitously that way.
It did.
Great minds think alike.
That's right.
Coming up in this week's show, we'll kind of review what happened in Week 1 with the big games that went on, and we're going to spice things up a little bit. We're going to rank the top 5 quarterbacks in the Sioux land. He's got a top 5. I've got a top 5. We do have some similarities, but we have some differences as well, so we're going to have fun kind of going through that towards the end of the show. But let's start off with recapping what happened in Week 1 around the Sioux land. And one of the big games, Shane, that we unfortunately didn't get to was Borden Hall Rock Valley beating Central Lyon Georgia Little Rock by a convincing 35-7. I didn't see that coming. I thought it would be a close game. I thought Central Lyon was going to come out on top. But the Nighthawks came out with a strong punch in Week 1.
They did. I mean, they were coming in at, I believe it was number 1 earlier in the week. So I guess hindsight is the best kind of sight. You can see it.
Yes.
Once you look at it, you're like, oh, of course, they're going to win. But yeah, I did not expect it to be quite as much a blowout as it was. But you had quarterback Tanner Tay-Slav, 166 yards, 2 touchdowns. I mean, that's quite a performance, and I guess they just came out roaring.
Yeah, and you mentioned T-Slaw. He didn't come out for football last year. He kind of wanted to focus on basketball the last couple years, and now that he committed to South Dakota State in the last couple weeks, he's gone back out for football, and it seems like as the quarterback, just with his athleticism, and you saw that in basketball, that's translating over to the football field as well.
Yeah, I mean, athletes can be athletes pretty much anywhere. I mean, especially if you're good in basketball like that, I mean, a lot of those skills translate over.
Yeah.
And apparently he's got a rocket of an arm, and he really showed it on Friday night.
And that just adds to what Borden Hall Rock Valley did last year, getting to the UD Dome last year, kind of going on a magical run, even in a pandemic-ridden season. I think they can catapult this, and maybe they can get to the Dome again this year.
Yeah, I mean, I have no doubts at this point. I mean, you take down a team like Central Lyon by, 28 points?
Yeah.
I mean, that's impressive. So that's kind of our, I guess, my team to watch over the next couple weeks. See if they can keep riding high and come out with another big win in the next week or two.
Absolutely. And Borden Hall Rock Valley has a big game coming up this week against Western Christian. You have two teams from the same town. That's going to be a pretty big one, too, and we're going to have that covered coming up this week.
Nice. Yeah, those two teams just seem to keep running into each other, sport after sport. I mean, they're
in the same town.
They just keep coming together for these big games, so it's fun. I just like that rivalry going on.
Just like basketball, there's not as much stake going on in this one, obviously.
Yeah, not quite the same level, but still pretty fun.
But maybe the Nighthawks had something to say about that after losing to the Wolfpack in the state title game back in March. So maybe that is in the back of their minds.
Got something to prove at this point.
Yeah, maybe the Rock Valley kids don't, but maybe they'll get fired up from the Borden Hall kids. And
could be. It translates over.
I think it will translate over. What other games piqued your interest from last week?
Well, the ones that I wrote down and kind of was interested in, I mean, we had Newell Fonda beat West Bend Mallard 54-12, and you mentioned when we were just talking before this podcast, I mean, you had Mason Dix and Wyatt Kreft both finished with 4 touchdowns, and Wyatt had kick returns of 77 and 78 yards separately. So he's shown some explosiveness. And even in one of the games that I covered with Sergeant Bluff, I mean, there was I forget what his name is, I should have done this before, but the kick returner for Lamar's, I'm going to look it up. I'm going to tweet out his name after this podcast, but he had several big kick returns.
Yes.
I don't think he had a kick return that didn't get back to the 40 or 45. So, very impressive showing from the special teams guys this week.
Yeah, absolutely. And since you covered that game last week, let's talk about that game for a couple minutes. SBL did what they needed to do to beat the Bulldogs. What impressed you about the Warriors? I know you wrote a lot about Jacob Mimming and Tyler Smith being that dynamic duo, but what else impressed you from Friday night?
Well, just the ability of both of those players and just the rest of their teammates to get the yardage that they needed. I mean, I pretty much was convinced that SBO was going to come out with a big win in that one, but just Tyler Smith's ability to scramble when he needs to. He did do some running last year, but it sounds like it's going to be a lot more a part of their playbook this year is to get him the ball with not as a last resort this time.
Right.
But yeah, he finished with, I believe it was 120 yards passing and 107 yards on the ground. So very impressed by him, and like you mentioned, Imming, just all-around athlete. Dude can pretty much do it all. And then they had another running back that also put up some good yards. So yeah, a lot of impressive stuff from the Warriors in Week 1.
The other big win in the Metro was East beating Bishop Peelan Friday night at Memorial Field. You get to see East coming up this week take on North at Olsen Stadium. East did what they had to do too against the Crusaders. You've talked to the to the Black Raiders rather, a couple of times. What do you feel like the Black Raiders need to do to kind of just keep the momentum rolling into Week 2?
Well, I think going up against North, I mean, it's going to be defense at this point. I mean, they showed an ability to run the ball on the ground last week, so I think East, if they can just kind of go on top of their offense. I mean, you have Longval. He's always able to do what he needs to do. But yeah, like we mentioned last week, defense is kind of key this week. So that's what I'm kind of looking for, defensive line presence. And I guess with as much as Luke passes, I mean, see if you can get a couple interceptions.
Yeah. A couple more shout-outs I want to get to before we get to the quarterback list. MFC Floyd Valley and Westwood. MFC Floyd Valley had to stop Siblio Cheaton basically with 90 seconds left to seal that win. MFC Floyd Valley struggled last year, to say the least. And for the Dutchman to come out and win that game, yeah, a win is a win. And to start the season 1-0, that's huge for the Dutchman.
Yeah, I mean, with defensive stops like that, it happened even at the game I covered last week out in Laurel, Nebraska. They had the defensive line holding Homer at the goal line to try to preserve the shutout. And this wasn't the same situation, not a shutout, but this was even bigger because it was a 1-point game. But those kind of defensive stops, those just boosts a team. I mean, you can just see it on the sideline when they get excited about the big guys kind of stopping the opposing running backs. It's just fun to watch as a sports writer.
And the other shout out I want to give to in terms of Westwood, that's Jackson D. Wald. He had 6 touchdowns. He was responsible for 42 of the 43 points that the Rebels scored last Friday night. And that set a school record of scoring 42 points in a game. So Jackson, well done. I know he's going to have a really nice school year. I know he's anticipated to do a lot on the wrestling side of things. And that's impressive for someone to come out that strong in Week 1.
Yeah, I mean, I have the stats. It was 27 rushes for 259 yards, 5 touchdowns, and 1 interception return touchdown. I mean, that's just doing it all. That's
just doing it all.
I mean, you go up after the game at that point. I always come up with good questions on specifics for players. That one, you just go like, how?
How did you do it?
It just blows me away, that kind of athleticism. I can't imagine ever doing something like that.
No, I couldn't either. Well, I never played football, so I
look at my size. I was a left tackle, so that tells you about how good our football team was.
All right, fair enough. So before we get into our quarterback list, which have some similarities, some differences, I know you're doing a series on the Prince side called the Quarterback Room. That got started last week with Briar Cliff's Luke Davies. And I know you're going to talk about a few high school quarterbacks as well, but talk to us about the series and what you're looking to get out of it and how it got started.
Well, it got started with me just kind of looking at a bunch of the new starting quarterbacks coming in. I mean, the series, I kind of want to focus on guys that are new to the starting quarterback position, kind of what they're learning as they're going. It's just a unique position in sports. I mean, like, it's the only position I can think of in any sport that is just as crucial to a team as that position is. So just kind of that pressure and that mindset that they get into, I really just want to kind of pick their brain a little bit, get to know them even as people. I mean, you saw with Luke Davies, I asked him just a few fun little questions too. So get to know kind of the captain of the offense and get to know them as people, I think is gonna be fun for this area.
Which other quarterbacks are you looking forward to talking with?
Well, there's a couple Metro guys I want to talk to. Carson Strobene with North. Eventually, I want to talk to him for this series. West, I want to talk to whoever their quarterback is. I believe it's Jonathan Jones right now, so I need to talk to him. And then probably a couple of the college guys. I mean, we have With Northwestern, you have Blake Fryer, he's not the starter right now, but he probably is right now until the actual starter comes back from injury, Tyson Koima. But I want to talk to him just about the experience that he had in the national championship game, and I guess now kind of transitioning into being a crucial part of the offense.
So let's get into this top 5 quarterback list. I have my 5, you have your 5. Let's start with you. Which 5 do you have? Like I said, a little bit of a spoiler. We do have 3 of the same, but let's go through yours first.
Well, I think my top one for this week is Beckett DeJean with OABCIG. Just the numbers that I looked up, he had 373 yards passing with 3 touchdowns this week, 107 yards rushing and 1 touchdown. I mean, being a DeJean, he has quite a big load on his shoulders here, but I think he lived up to the hype, and he definitely impressed me.
Do you think that Beckett can live up to the hype of Cooper in terms of being that, maybe not defensively, but especially offensively, just being follow in your first footsteps type of guy?
I think it's tough to have that kind of expectation for anybody. So what I kind of hope for Beckett is that he doesn't feel that kind of pressure to live up to what Cooper was. I mean, he's his own guy, and Cooper just did just legendary numbers. So I'm hoping Beckett can just kind of come into his own, put up his own numbers, and just still be a DeJean but make a name for himself.
Yep. Who else you got?
Well, I have Dylan Wiggins from West Sioux. He went 10 for 20 passing for 281 yards and 6 touchdowns last week. So those are some big numbers too. I was kind of my eyes popped out a little bit when I saw 6 touchdowns. So he would be my second one. And then I have Dallas Klunder, 169 passing yards, 3 touchdowns, passing, and 37 yards rushing with 3 touchdowns. Pretty impressive as well.
All right, finish out your list.
Well, I have Tyler Smith, like we mentioned already, who had over 100 yards rushing, over 100 yards passing. So I was definitely impressed with that. And then I made a change to my list. You also have Luke Longval. I have Luke Longval on my list as well.
Didn't know that.
So yeah, he put up big numbers last year, so had a good performance this past Friday night. And I'm looking forward to seeing what he can do this coming week.
So the only difference we have in our list between mine and yours, you have Tanner T-Slaw, and I have Zach Gluttmer, Central Line George Little Rock, which is kind of coincidental because they went against each other last week. Mm-hmm. I love Tanner. He's a great athlete, and he's probably in the running for Basketball Player of the Year because of just his athleticism, but just for the fact that he hasn't been on the football field for a while, just kind of took myself away from that list, and that's why I went with Lutmer. He's a very athletic quarterback, can run the ball, can throw the ball, and we saw a lot of that last year. Last season, he ran for over 1,600 yards. He's a very good dual threat quarterback, but he can also throw the ball as well. He completed 72 passes last year for 126 attempts. He threw just under 1,200 yards, so that showed you just what he did last year. He's able to run the ball. He's able to throw the ball. And we saw a lot of that Friday night against the Nighthawks. Now, granted, yes, he was the losing quarterback against the Nighthawks. But I think Lutmer can take those lessons from what didn't work on Friday night and catapult him into maybe beating a Sergeant Bluff this week and maybe going on another Unity Dome run that they did last year. And if he can learn from his mistakes, which I'm sure he can, he's a junior, he's experienced, I think he's going to have another heck of a year.
Yeah, I mean, you mentioned him and Tanner T-Slaw. He was another guy that he was on my list. I was considering putting him in the top 5. I mean, like we mentioned, 166 yards, 2 touchdowns, and they have good running back and Bryson Van Grutheist, 87 yards, Bryson Van Kierkery, 94 yards. Got a lot of weapons on that team, and that definitely helps a quarterback. He can, if he has those kind of people to go to.
And there are other good quarterbacks that we didn't even include in this list either, and they're going to be vital pieces to their teams as well, and hopefully those quarterbacks can kind of have good seasons and go on deep playoff runs as well. Make sure to check out SiouxCityJournal.com for all our playoff coverage, both in print and digital. Shane will be covering the Northeast game coming up on Friday night. We'll preview that in Friday's live stream. We thank you so much for watching this podcast, and if you have any suggestions, any feedback, any comments, make sure you email us at scjsports@SiouxCityJournal.com. For Assistant Sports Editor Shane Lantz, I'm Sports Editor Zach James. We thank you so much for listening to and watching the Playbook Pundits podcast. We'll talk to you next week. Thanks for watching.